medical school. So I was really delighted to have this opportunity to come out and meet you all tonight and hear about the questions you have about the COVID-19 pandemic and what we're doing about it. So I'm going to say very little, and then we can hopefully have plenty of time for questions and answers. But one of the things I'm sure you all appreciate is that New Zealand and the Pacific have forged their own response to the pandemic that is almost unique in the world. In many cases, the Pacific Islands have entirely excluded the pandemic. There's only about 8 countries left in the world that have had no cases and never had a case. So that's actually an exclusion approach. In New Zealand, we've had an elimination approach, as you all know, and that means we've had to stamp out the virus and then keep it out. And of course, the next step that we'll hear a lot more about is vaccination. So I don't need to tell you about how devastating the pandemic's been in many countries. It's lowering life expectancy, even in the United States, I was just reading today, by 1 to 2%, depending on what population group you're in. So it's not quite as devastating as the 1918 flu pandemic, but it's actually heading in that direction at the moment. So I don't think we've overreacted, even though sometimes it feels like that. The things we're doing are quite extreme. And the other thing I want to really thank you all for, and I think that's part of the whole New Zealand response, is all the things that you've had to do differently in your lives to support our huge collective effort to manage this pandemic. And that's the things that we all know well, that particularly if you have cold and flu symptoms, it's a new norm, if you like. In the past, we were encouraged to soldier on. I'm sure many of you have done that. All of us have done that. We've gone off to work or school or whatever we were doing because we felt we had to. And I think many of you are perhaps in jobs where it's harder to take time off work. And we know that actually that's not the right way for the future. It's been a vital response to the pandemic, that we stay at home, we don't infect the people around us, the people we care about, and we go and get tested or we ring Healthline. And that's been an absolutely key measure. And the other thing that I think is a revolution for us in New Zealand is to not share this respiratory virus around to people in our environment. And we started off thinking, of course, this virus was spread by touching things, and we had to be very careful to wash our hands, which is still really important. But we now know this is a respiratory virus. It's spread by aerosols, which are not just droplets that have a limited range, but aerosols that can go many meters. And why it's so important to wear a mask if you're in an indoor environment, because that actually protects the people around you, because it means you're not firing out these respiratory particles. So that's another huge change in thinking that it's quite foreign to us, but I think it's something we have to embrace. And you probably know that several remarkable things happened in New Zealand last year. Not only did we stamp out the pandemic and then some waves that occurred, particularly in Auckland, and kept it out, but also a lot of other respiratory viruses stopped coming. We had no flu epidemic, which we normally have every year. It kills about 500 people every year in New Zealand, our biggest single infectious disease killer. So we've discovered that actually these things really do work, this new norm we have. So I think that's very valuable. And I guess the other thing we're also familiar with is the new norm we have about recording. When we go into places, we keep a record of those places we visited, either scanning in or writing a note. So that's a whole other new change in behaviour. So these are some of the things that we're all learning about. And one of the real positives, I think, is this amazing sense that we're all in it together, not just in New Zealand, but across the Pacific. The Asia-Pacific region has done much better than, if you like, what the so-called Western world. And I think it's a model for how those countries could manage the pandemic better. I mean, that's all I really want to say at this stage. Thank you all for being here. And I'll just hand over. If you've got questions about the pandemic, I'm now a real pandemic bore. And at home, they don't take me out anymore because I bore people so much talking about COVID. But I have been intensely involved in it now for 18 months. So hopefully I'll try not to bore you tonight.
I need to practice more Tokelauan. O ko hingoa ko Dianne, Sika-Paotonu ko hau mai Aotearoa New Zealand. o ko tamai mo ko whae, ko hau me tonga, me hapai mo whavahu. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And on behalf of my colleagues here, thank you again with respect for the kind invitation to have us here tonight. It was a very exciting invitation, but also an opportunity to come and meet with you together. And we thank you so much for the very warm welcome and the kind hospitality that you have shared with us tonight. So I've been asked to share a bit about myself, and I thought it might be helpful to show some pictures as well. So I work at the University of Otago, Wellington. I grew up here in Cannons Creek. I actually used to live down the road just off Bedford Street in Norfolk Grove. So my parents were from Tonga. My father used to play rugby for the Tongan national rugby team, but he gave up his rugby career to marry my mum. Mum was a church girl, went to church on Saturdays and wanted to, my father wanted to marry her and she kept saying no. Dad used to be a very heavy drinker, very heavy smoker, and used to be a bit of a troublemaker. And Mum kept saying no, and finally she said yes, but there were conditions attached, and those conditions were: number one, he had to give up smoking; number two, he had to give up drinking; and number three, he had to start coming to church and coming to God. And so, typical Tongan, Pacific male, overnight my father gave up his international rugby career to marry my mother and never looked back. And so we used to live down the road, and my father worked for Mitsubishi Motors. They came here in the 1960s during the recruitment drive that New Zealand held to bring cheap labour, if you like, from the Pacific, and my parents were afforded an opportunity to come here. And they both worked very, very hard to ensure that my brother and I had the opportunities that they never had, and to have educational opportunities as well. So I started here in Cannons Creek School. I was actually at the kindergarten in Waitangiroa for a little bit, then graduated to Cannons Creek Primary School, and then moved on from there to university, college of course, and then university. And so I've lived here in Wellington for most of my life. And I remember when this hall was built, because it was all the news in our communities that the Tokelauans community had built a hall in a very short space of time. And so while we were growing up, we knew that there was this wonderful hall here and this community centre and hub. So just wanted to mention that as well. If it's okay, I just thought I'd just show you picture-wise what it is that I do. So I work as a senior lecturer, so I'm an academic person. I do teaching, I do research, and I also go to lots of meetings along with some of my esteemed colleagues here. And so perhaps maybe we could go to the next slide. So my background is in cancer vaccine development, so this is a bit different to the COVID vaccine that's now available, but I've always had a strong interest in cancer. When I was little, a family friend passed away, and I promised my mum, I made her a very big promise that I was going to grow up and cure cancer. And so we're still working on that one. It will be a little while, but nevertheless, one of my research interests. Also, another research interest and area that I'm working in, along with others, is to try and detect cancer, find cancer earlier at a time point where it would be more likely to be successfully treated, and so working with other researchers, again, staying in the cancer area. And we also do quite a bit of work at the University of Otago, Wellington, on rheumatic fever, and just wanted to mention that Michael Baker is a very trusted friend, but he's also someone I've worked with for a bit now, and Michael has worked for a very long time in this particular area. Not just acute rheumatic fever, but also rheumatic heart disease, and so I've had the opportunity also to assist Michael with the work that he's been doing, very important work, but we're also building our Pacifica researchers, and we're now leading a piece of that research as well, where we're trying to make a type of penicillin that's given to our children and young people to stop them getting rheumatic fever again. We're trying to make the drug last longer and hurt less. So that's another piece of work that I thought might be of interest to you all. And just to highlight that a lot of the research work that we all do here is not done alone. We don't just work by ourselves, we work with many others. And you can see here that there are lots of organisations and groups that we connect in with, but importantly, we work very closely with our communities, our Pacifica communities. And please forgive me if there are some non-Tokelauan Pacific people here and your flag isn't up on the screen. Forgive me for that. I thought you might be interested to know at the University of Otago that our Pacific staff numbers are going up. So these are some of the Pacific staff that you will encounter if you have anything to do with our university. And I thought you'd also like to know that our Pacific student numbers are also going up as well. And what you can see here are some of our medical students. So you'll know that we have a medical school, and our numbers of Pacific medical students who are training to be doctors have been going up as well. And you can see some of our Pacific and some of our non-Pacific students here in this picture. These are some of our non-Pacific and Pacific researchers at the University of Otago, Wellington here. A lot of them have been helping out with the rheumatic fever work and also with the cancer work as well. So these are just some of them, not all of them, but just a few. And what you can see here are some of our senior medical students learning to speak Cook Islands Māori. So we're at a point of time now where I thought you might want to know that this next generation of doctors, we have an opportunity to teach them how to speak. They all know how to speak a little bit of Tongan, a little bit of Samoan, a little bit of Cook Islands. Please forgive us, we're still working on the Tokelauan and other languages, so if anyone wants to help us with this work, help teach our medical students just some of the simple phrases, greetings, etc. Please let us know. We would welcome your input. But I thought you might want to know that there's a very strong emphasis now on training the next generation of doctors and nurses to be more aware of our communities, but also to speak the language. So these are some of our students learning to speak Cook Islands Māori. And also some of our other students at Te Papa, so we teach them about the dawn raids, we teach them about the immigration issues and patterns over the years, we teach them things about our communities that have happened and have affected us in the past and that have some sort of lingering, ongoing health implications. So these are some of our students up at Te Papa who've been learning about our history here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So they get to hear and learn about the good, but also the bad and the ugly. And what we try to help them focus on is how this could help them in their practice and how could this help them be doctors who are better understanding of our communities. And we've also had some visits from the Cook Island community who have come in to help our students learn more about the Cook Islands people and culture. This was also someone at the team from Papua New Guinea, so we're trying to help our students understand that in the Pacific region there are 22 plus different countries and that we're all very different. And so this was Team Papua New Guinea who came in also to help us with our teaching. And just to finish off, as I've mentioned before, my heritage is Tongan. My brother and I were both born here in New Zealand, and I've got pictures here of my family. My husband is actually Samoan Niuean, and we have one daughter, Alicia. We nearly lost her when she was little, so she's an only child. We're very grateful to have her in our family, but here's my mum and dad. So my dad's passed away now, but if he knew that you were looking at his picture tonight, he would be so happy, because remember, we used to live down the road and we used to talk about this special Tokelauan hall up the road. And I hope it's all right, I've just included, just to finish off, my father's rugby picture. And again, if he were alive today, knowing that the Tokelauan, members of the Tokelauan community and leadership were looking at his rugby photo, he would be so proud. So thank you for letting me show that. And also just highlighting that, again, and offering thanks for inviting us to be here tonight. We also do a bit of work as part of the university in terms of connecting with our little ones out in schools and colleges as well. And this is just to show you some of the other work that we do as well, to try and stay connected and also to listen to our people and understand how we can do things better. And this is just the last slide. I just wanted to share this, in that some of you may not know, but Albert Einstein was actually Tongan. His real name's Albert Einstein, and he had a gold tooth, but you can't see it here. And this is one of my favourite quotes, and it's something that I trust will mean a lot to all of us here tonight, that those who have had the privilege to know have the duty to act. And I just wanted to say thank you again for the very warm welcome, and also for the loto and the blessing that was offered. But also I am very keenly aware that everyone here plays a very important part and does work that matters to our people and for our people. And I know that we're not going to solve all of our health issues overnight, but what I am very confident of is that if all of you stopped doing the work that you were doing, our people would be a whole lot worse off. So malo albito, from the bottom of my heart, ofa lahi atu. Thank you so much again for inviting us here. Bless you all.
Malo ni, tēnā koutou katoa, talofa lava, malola lei, kia rana. And thank you so much for the very warm welcome, for the blessing, for the food, for the warmth from everybody. It's a privilege to come tonight, actually. So I'm Nikki Turner. I'm actually a GP by training. I do work part-time still as a GP in Wellington with Newtown Union Health Service out in Strathmore. But I work for the University of Auckland, and my husband has blessed me with coming tonight, and he works for the opposition. He works for these guys, the University of Otago, but we all get on okay despite that. But look, it's a real privilege to come tonight, because not just in general practice and primary care, but my area of interest started in child health and has now moved into immunisation and vaccination. And a bit over 20 years ago, I developed the organisation that's now called the Immunisation Advisory Centre. And the purpose of IMAC, the Immunisation Advisory Centre, was to support the National Immunisation Programme for our children, for our tamariki. And when I started, which is a few years ago now, our immunisation programme for our children was really low. For our Pacifica children, for our tamariki Māori, and for all our children, our coverage rates were very low. And over the last 20 years, we've done a lot of improvement for our children, and we're getting better with our immunisation coverage for our children. It took a long time and a lot of effort, but we are improving it. And now the immunisation program is actually moving into adults as well, and many of you will have experienced flu vaccination, which is the major adult vaccination. So that for the last 20 years, IMAC has been focused on supporting the education and training, the science behind why do we use vaccines, why are we using them? So that's my background. And then, of course, as Michael's described, we had a bit of a problem in the world with this COVID pandemic. And many of us realised right at the start of the COVID pandemic that there's no really effective medicine to treat COVID. There's some medicines that help a bit, and many of us will have seen people desperate for oxygen around the world, desperate for some drugs to try and help. But in the end, we do not still have really effective treatment for COVID. That's the problem. So, and the next thing we realised is that COVID particularly affects older people people with medical problems. Whereas a lot of other diseases often more affect our young children, COVID's particularly severe for people of my age and a bit older, and people with medical problems. Just a little bit older. So we were aware very early on that we really needed a vaccine to help protect as well. And so the world panicked, as they should, because lots and lots of people were dying. So for the first time ever, the world got its act together in a way I've never seen before, and the scientists all around the world got together to get vaccines made. And within a year, we have had vaccines that have gone through all the important steps of the clinical trials to know that they work. Now, this is extraordinary, and people say it's too fast, it can't be real. But the reason why we got these vaccines so fast was, firstly, the world put squillions of dollars into it. They put lots and lots of money, because in the end we realised we had to have a vaccine to try and mitigate the effects of this. So we put lots of money in, and the scientists got together and they put a lot of effort into building everything all ready for vaccines, so that once they'd gone through their important big clinical trials, they were ready to manufacture. So that's why the world got together and got vaccines. Now, this week is a momentous week in many ways, because the Immunisation Advisory Centre has been very involved with helping Tokelauan and get vaccination to Tokelauan. And many of you will be very aware that the New Zealand Defence Force, we supported them to get the right cold chain, the fridges that you need to transport this vaccine. Got it on the New Zealand Defence Force boat. It arrived in Tokelauan on Monday, and the last 3 days, amazing people in Tokelauan have been out there vaccinated, and pretty well almost all people on Tokelauan are now almost everybody's vaccinated for their first dose. They're ahead of New Zealand. We're way behind that, so it's pretty impressive. And it took a lot of effort behind the scenes. I know a lot of our staff spent most of the weekend talking to people about how to manage the fridges and how you use the needles and how you deliver them. So huge effort. And if any of you go on the Facebook of the government of Tokelauan, there's fantastic. Has anyone seen them? The fantastic pictures out there. So we feel really privileged to be part of that. We're also part of the delivery to the Cook Islands, and so it's great that we can help support. So today, I really want to hear from you folks, hear your questions, try and support you to answer them. Everybody's got a lot of questions, and no question is too stupid, okay? I want to hear everybody's questions, and we'll see if we can support people through them, because you have to feel okay about vaccines to know how they're going to work for you. Do you feel okay about it? So please, we're here to listen to your questions, to try and help, to try and walk people through it. And that in that way, we believe that New Zealand has got a chance getting a vaccinated population. Next year, then we can start to open up our borders and start to return to some sort of normality, which is still a long way off at this stage. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm really keen to hear your questions. But look, I'll give my husband a chance to speak.
Malani, kia ora koutou. I'm very surprised to be sitting here at this top table. I'm not an expert in vaccines. I am a GP, a family doctor, but also do work at the university, as has been said. And one of my research interests is listening to people and listening to stories and to narratives, and recognising the power of stories and of what people say. We do a lot of research on that. So I feel very privileged to be here this evening, to be able to listen to you, to your stories and to your questions. Because out of stories comes great power, comes great learning, and comes great wisdom. And you may think that we have some degree of expertness up here, but in fact the real knowledge and wisdom for you and for your community lies within you. And I hope one of the real values of this evening is us learning together and realising that power and that strength. I had the privilege of working a couple of years ago with a wonderful PhD student of mine called Emma Dunlop Barrett, and we were looking at specific ways of viewing well-being amongst children, amongst Pacific children. And one of the things that came out of that I learned was that in Pacific culture, we look at things from different viewpoints. So there is the view from the mountain, there is the view from the treetop, there is the view from the canoe, and when we were thinking about children, we were wondering whether or not that was the view from the fish. Now, this evening, I think that we will hear views from the mountaintops, from the trees, from the canoe, but they will be coming from all of us together, not just from the experts. So thank you in advance for the wisdom that you're going to give to us, and it is a privilege to be here.
Can I acknowledge as well, we have Dr. Mary Tolo, one of our daughters of this community at the back here, Dr. JP at Unit Health down King Street here. She's going to try and help and facilitate some of the questions as well. Hey, Mary? So, ni hoi mana tātou kāinga, kai rawa he hili ni, mai tōli mā kilunga ki kawatu te Ruby Meister te Mike, ni? Ana tua ko te mutakupu lawa patino tono lawa ki te COVID, ma te tui pui ni, he tahi wānga tarano ki tātou ki ni. Ka tukatu la te hili ni ki te tātou kāinga ni, mana?
Thank you. Happy to. So the question was, can I tell people about the vaccine we've got in New Zealand? So New Zealand at this stage has one vaccine. There are quite a few now licensed around the world. The vaccine that New Zealand's got is called Community. It's been used extensively around the world now in several 100 million people. So it's got wide use. It is not an experimental vaccine anymore. It was initially used in Europe and in America late last year and has been used in very, very many people from ages of 16 years right up to any age at all. In some countries, it's been used in 12 to 15-year-olds. Does the vaccine work? We know from the clinical trials, but we now know also from the countries that have got a lot of vaccinated people that when you vaccinate a community with this vaccine, if you have 2 doses given, it is likely to protect around 90 to 95 people out of 100. And they are very, very unlikely to die or end up in hospital. Some people will still get a bit sick, even when they're vaccinated. Some people can still carry the virus when they're vaccinated. Only a few people. So it's not effective for everybody. But within this room, if you were all vaccinated and then Michael released COVID into this room, I would say about 2 of you would get a little bit sick. So that's how effective it is. Now we know this because countries have used so many doses that it's not just the clinical trials now, it's on big numbers. Israel has shown us they were one of the leading countries in the world with this vaccine, and now their country is starting to open up. Their older people can go and cuddle their grandchildren again because the vaccine is working. It won't work for everybody, it'll work for most people. Is it safe? Okay, is it safe? Now what we do know is you get side effects after vaccines. Now, have you people in this room had flu vaccine before? Some of you? And you know that you can get sore arms, you can get aches and pains, you can get headaches, some people get fever. We see that with this vaccine. Okay, so those side effects are quite common, particularly in younger people, because younger people have really vigorous immune systems. So younger people have even more side effects. They pass usually within 1 to 2, maybe 3 days. Are there any really bad side effects? Well, there are in really rare cases, okay? And the one that we're particularly watching out for is severe allergic reactions. When you go and get your vaccine, you will be asked to wait afterwards for 20 minutes to ensure that you don't get a sudden bad allergic reaction. If you do, all New Zealand vaccinators, all our wonderful nurses and our other vaccinators are trained to manage that. Now we have seen a few of those already in New Zealand and they've all been well managed. So other than that, what we often see is if you vaccinate lots of people in a population, sometimes things happen at the same time. So you'll hear people say, people have died after being vaccinated. Now, when we vaccinate very elderly people or people with significant medical problems, sometimes they die, but it's not caused by the vaccine. Because you're vaccinating so many people, you sometimes see events that happen soon afterwards. You know, I've had somebody come and say to me, you gave me the flu vaccine and I got flu the next day. You can't get flu from the flu vaccine. You cannot get COVID from the COVID vaccine. So sometimes things happen at the same time, okay? Now, there's a few other things to say about this vaccine, is that we do understand how it works, and it's a vaccine that uses what we call a piece of genetic material to make the body make its own protein that the body looks at and thinks it's COVID. There is no COVID in the vaccine. It's not live, it's got no virus in it. And also, it cannot get inside the nucleus of the cell, so it cannot change who I am, okay? It's designed to go to the body and the body makes a protein, and that's what we respond to. So that's what this vaccine is. Other vaccines in the world are all slightly different, and they're made in different ways. But this is the vaccine we've got now. So I hope that starts to answer your questions, but please, I'm sure there's lots more, and please ask. So this is a really good question. How long will the vaccine be effective for? And we don't know yet. We know it's effective, but we've only been using it since late last year. So we know 8, 9, 10 months now that it's still highly effective. We don't know yet how long it will be effective for. I suspect that in a few years' time, we will probably need a booster, probably particularly for people whose immune systems aren't so strong, a bit like what we do with flu vaccine. So I do not think it will be effective for many, many years, but we are hoping it will be effective for a few years. But we just have to wait over time to see if the effectiveness stays or not. So the question is the vaccine effective against the new variants? And as we know, because there's so much COVID in the world, when the virus gets together, it can mutate and change, and it's been doing that rapidly. And everybody's worried about the recent mutation, the Delta mutation. Now, what I can say tonight is this vaccine is still effective against the Delta mutation. It's slightly less by just a little bit, and you need 2 doses. It's not that effective with 1 dose, but with 2 doses, it's still extremely effective against severe illness, against dying, against ending up in hospital. A little less effective against mild disease, but it's still one of the most effective vaccines we've got right now. So I'm really confident, and we've got lots and lots of numbers out there to feel confident about.
My name is Mary. I'm one of our GP working here in Porirua. Nice to meet you. Here like the Delta variant. But the Delta variant, I think that's one of the coronaviruses that was first detected in India. So the scary thing about this virus, it's very ke hoho ai te Koviti hului, o te mea vai pui aki tātou, e me hau pui aki tātou ko te tui hului. E o te he tamā te
Thank you. That's an excellent question, is why can't we vaccinate our children under 16? So the initial clinical trials were done on adults and the elderly, and the reason for that, as Michael can eloquently explain, is the disease is overwhelmingly severe in older people. So the urgency initially was to protect older people. That's why the first clinical trials, it was rolled out for people 16 years and older. Now the world is aware, and New Zealand is aware, that we want to protect our whole community and we want to broaden it to our children as well. The first urgency is to protect those most at risk, so yes, we're vaccinating everybody 16 years and above. But at the moment, all around the world, they are doing clinical trials on children. And as we know, just a few weeks back, New Zealand got approval that we could start vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. And we are considering when we can manage to do that. That's a resourcing issue, it really is. First, we've got to vaccinate those who are most at risk. Then New Zealand would like to start vaccinating its children, and the same for our Pacific populations in the Pacific Islands. And we're waiting for the clinical data to come through. And the clinical trials are now working down to children 5 to 12, and now they're doing studies on children under 5 as well. So in the next year, we will start to see evidence coming through of, is this vaccine safe and effective for our children? There's two reasons for that. One is to protect the children, but the other reason is the more of us that are vaccinated, when that COVID virus comes into this room, it has trouble spreading. So the more people that are vaccinated, the virus can't spread through us all. So that means our whole community, our adults and our children. So in the long run, yes, we'd like to vaccinate our children as well. It's coming, just slowly.
Could I just add to that, it doesn't mean that the children have been forgotten. That there is planning, there has been discussions, as Nikki was saying. It's not as if the children will be left out. And I think it's important that communities recognise that.
So the question was, our babies are getting sick at the moment, and there's lots of our babies in hospital, and that's very true. What I can say is I'm part of a team that is looking at the viruses all around the country, and there's a virus that's running through New Zealand called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and many of our children are positive for that. But at the same time, they're testing all of our very sick children for COVID, and they so far have all come back negative. Now, we cannot be complacent. COVID is only a plane flight away, so New Zealand is still testing all its sick people in hospital for COVID to look for it. So at this stage, we are seeing a lot of this other nasty virus, which we didn't see last year because New Zealand was in lockdown, and now it's come back really badly. And we've got overwhelming rates in our paediatric wards. And most of it is RSV, there's some other viruses around. We are looking hard for COVID, and New Zealand needs to keep looking hard because the comments around the Delta variant are very true. We've seen our poor Australian colleagues in trouble with the Delta variant getting into Australia. And so, please God, New Zealand so far is managing to keep it out. But Michael could be really eloquent on how important it is for us to keep watching. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
So you may know that New Zealand Cabinet's actually meeting tonight to decide whether to pause the whole bubble with Australia, which I think would be a real pity, but it might be necessary. And this is being driven, of course, by the far more infectious Delta variant. And the fact that states in Australia that have succeeded so far are struggling now, particularly New South Wales, and that could be us in a few days if we don't maintain all of the precautions that I think we've talked about, that I think you know about. But we could talk about that more if you do have questions about how our actions are so important to maintain this virus-free position that we're in. And we are really almost unique in the world amongst certainly this region, probably everywhere, countries that are actually keeping the virus out successfully, but we cannot guarantee that. The other thing I'd say is that obviously we are having a wave of more RSV this year, and it's partly because New Zealand was so successful at dampening down transmission last year. And when you look at the numbers, New Zealand actually had the largest negative mortality in the world. In other words, we had our lowest mortality rate in history, and 2,000 lives were saved last year who would normally have died over winter. And that's because we were so successful at dampening down all these other viruses, influenza and RSV, that kill people every winter. We didn't have them. This year, some of them are returning, and so we are seeing more cases than usual. But so far, I think we're succeeding in keeping seasonal influenza largely out. So no flu this year, which is quite phenomenal, and that is 2,000 of mainly older New Zealanders who will live another year. We can enjoy their company, which is a wonderful achievement. So one of the prices, I think, in a way, is this slight increase, very significant increase in RSV, but we have to balance that against the huge benefits we have of far fewer people dying at the moment.
I think there is a lot of illness and sickness amongst our young children at the moment, and it's important that communities and parents are watchful for those kind of conditions. Not to be frightened that it might be COVID or anything else, but if your young child or grandchild is sick, then get help, get reviewed, get seen, and also don't be worried if, even with very small children, this happened to our grandson last week, they stick a COVID probe up the nose because that's what it takes. We're being watchful, we're being very careful about all of these respiratory illnesses, and it's important that we keep watchful.
So the question is, how long from the first one to the second one? A really good question. Sorry? If it's outside the 3 weeks, yeah. So you have to have 2 vaccines, okay? The second one has to be not earlier than 3 weeks, so it's got to be at least 3 weeks, but it can be many weeks later. In fact, if somebody has a really vigorous immune reaction the first time, you'd be better off waiting like 4, 5 or 6 weeks. It's fine, it's going to work great. So it doesn't matter if you don't get it bang on 3 weeks, you could get it 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, no problem, it's going to work really well. So later is not a problem, but giving it earlier than 3 weeks is a problem, okay? You want a gap. Now the only other thing to know is that if you've had a flu vaccine, people recommend you try and keep a 2-week gap from the flu to the COVID. It's not that important, okay? They're going to work. So you're not too worried about the flu to the COVID vaccine gap, but you want at least 3 weeks from the first to the second. Longer is great, as long as you don't forget it. Okay, you've got to not forget the second one. Kia ora.
Just to support also what Nikki has been saying, is that those 2 doses, that the 2 vaccines, they are the same, but you need to get that second one, as Nikki was saying, at least 3 weeks after, so that you get the protection that you need. If you only get the first one, you get this level of protection. If you get the second one, that level jumps right up. So you need both doses, even though they are both the same.
There's something else I wanted to add. I made rude comments about us being slightly of older years in this room. Younger people get a really good immune response to this vaccine. It's really effective because it was designed to make our older immune systems work. So younger people get a really vigorous response. There's probably an advantage, we think, in actually having a longer gap for younger people to their second dose. And so we suggest that younger people could actually have a longer gap, like 8 weeks, for their second dose. It's going to work great. And the longer gap will probably have less side effects. Okay, but older people, us, don't forget we need the second dose. So the question is, the trials show that more than 9 out of 10 are protected, but that means maybe 1 out of 10 is not protected. That goes back to our earlier comments that if I talk about 100 people, 95 will be protected, but 5 people could still get COVID. Now, out of those 5 people who get COVID, most of them will be mild, but one of them may end up in hospital, and very, very rarely, fully vaccinated people have died of COVID. So it's not 100%. There will always be some people, even when they're fully vaccinated, who may get sick from COVID, and then very, very rarely end up in hospital, and even more rarely die. So this vaccine will not protect totally everybody, but it protects the vast majority, okay? So yes, some people are still at risk, and of course, we don't know in our community who doesn't respond to the vaccine. We don't know that. So there's two strategies. One is you have the vaccine to protect yourself, but the other is we all have the vaccine so that we also protect that 1 out of 10 person who may not be protected because we don't know who they are. So that's the importance of not just me protecting myself, but me being vaccinated so I don't spread it so much to the rest of you, because it is not 100% effective with everybody. And if you think about the fact that some people's immune systems aren't so great, you know how some people, you might be on cancer treatment, or your diabetes is out of control, and your immune system's not so great, you may not respond quite so well to the vaccine. So we need protection from each other as well. Kia ora. Oh, well, we're Frontline. The reason is, that's not because Michael doesn't want to be vaccinated. We're Frontline healthcare providers, so we were in the first group to be offered the vaccine. So hugely privileged to be vaccinated. I had a really sore arm. I couldn't sleep on it all night. But I'm really grateful to be vaccinated.
And I also had a sore arm and a bit of a headache after 2 or 3 days. But beyond that, nothing. And I also feel privileged and also pleased that I've got the vaccine. So again, I think there is nothing in this vaccine to be frightened of. There is nothing in this vaccine to be worried about. And it's much, 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 much better than getting COVID.
I haven't been vaccinated yet, but that's not because I don't want to be vaccinated. I'm still waiting for my call-up, and as soon as I get my call-up, I will be vaccinated. So for me as a Pacifica female, I'm very keenly aware that I'm more likely to get COVID, and that if I do get COVID, am likely to end up worse off.
I'm very much looking forward to getting the vaccine. I'm not quite in, I'm still in group 4 and I'm waiting my turn patiently. I am actually a doctor, but I switched to public health, so I don't see patients anymore, so I'm not in that first group. But I was just talking to my twin brother, it was our birthday yesterday, I was just talking to him on the phone. He's a GP in Sydney, and he actually has Astrazeneca some time ago, and no adverse effects at all.
That's another vaccine. So the question of the Astrazeneca vaccine that's used in Australia and many other countries, is it effective against the Delta variant? It is slightly less effective, but it's definitely over 80%. Once again, not so effective with 1 dose, you need 2 doses. It is less effective against the beta variant that's come out of South Africa. So they are looking at changing the formulation to cover that one, but it is still really well effective against this nasty Delta. So probably not quite as high as the vaccine we've got. So we're very privileged to have this community, the Pfizer vaccine. They're all acting really well at the moment. So this is a really good question. If you had 100 people in a room and 2 of them are unvaccinated, would the risk rise? Now, if the COVID virus was floating around and you're vaccinated, you're way less likely to carry it. If you're not vaccinated, you're way more likely to catch it and to spread it. And if you're not vaccinated and you catch it, you're more likely to get sick. When you get sick, you cough. And as Michael has just described, if you cough, you spread it more. So people who might carry it but aren't symptomatic, spreading it's way less. So those 2 people are at much higher risk of getting sick, at much higher risk of getting very, very sick, and when they're very sick, they're at much higher risk of spreading it. And then that virus can find the vaccinated people in the room who may not have responded to the vaccine. So you're just putting your risk up. You're raising your risk. Every time you've got an unvaccinated person, you're just raising the risk higher in the room for the virus to be able to spread between us all. It's like you've got less walls. And so it's the same principle with measles vaccination. You know, the more people vaccinated, the virus just can't go through the wall. But the less people vaccinated, it can find its way through all the unprotected people, which are all the unvaccinated and a very small percentage of the vaccinated. There's a question about will we see side effects further down the line, and particularly a question about infertility. Now this comes along, people will say, well, you don't know if this is going to be safe in 20 years' time. How can you tell me it is? Well, what I can say from all vaccines, if there's a safety signal, you see them early on. And that the countries in the world with large resources, Europe, England, America, are following vaccinated people in the tens of millions and the hundreds of millions very closely. And they're looking at background rates of lots of conditions, including infertility. So they're looking at background rates of medical conditions to see if they're changing when you're vaccinated. That's the way that with that other vaccine, the Astrazeneca, they picked up the blood clot problem. And so what we do know is that they're monitoring closely and they're picking up these events. You are not going to suddenly pick something up in 20 years' time that you didn't notice in the early days. They're looking for anything that could affect immune systems, your brains, your hearts, your lungs. They're out there looking. And the numbers, this vaccine has been used in millions of numbers, more than any other vaccine. So we're not going to suddenly find something in 20 years' time that we did not find now. There was a myth a few months back about whether it could be associated with infertility. It is not. There is no association with infertility. The medicine is very confident that you can still have the vaccine if you're thinking about trying to fall pregnant. No concerns at all. It does not affect male fertility at all. So all the blokes can feel extremely relaxed about that. So the question was, could, through this vaccination program, the COVID virus or some other virus be introduced? The answer is no, and the reason it is because there's no virus in the vaccine. The vaccine is the menu to make a protein. There is no virus in the vaccine, so the vaccine cannot cause virus. Could it introduce another virus? There's no other virus in it. It's a very simple, pure vaccine. There's no virus in it at all. The only way you could introduce another virus into Tokelau is by somebody coming into Tokelau carrying it, which is why most of us supporting the Tokelau vaccination program did not go there. We've been supporting remotely. The naval ships stayed off the shore. They kept really strict quarantine because the biggest risk is not the vaccine, it's the people who might be carrying COVID. So that's the risk for COVID, is whether you let someone in. And I know, and I'm sure many of you know, how rigorous Tokelau has been about not allowing people in case they were carrying COVID. So the question was somebody who's had a stent for a heart problem and is on a blood thinner that makes your blood thin. So in terms of the vaccine, what we do know is that people with heart conditions, it does not make them worse. So you're okay, it's not going to make your heart condition worse. When you're on a blood thinner, like a lot of us are now, like aspirin or dabigatran or warfarin, you can bleed more with a needle. So it's really important when somebody vaccinates you that you keep pressure on your arm for a long time so you don't get a big bruise. You know, some of us have seen those big bruises when you go to the lab and the blood test's a bit enthusiastic and you get that large bruise. So it's really important that you keep pressure on the site for a long time for any vaccine so you don't get a big bruise. So the question was a concern about having a stent in your body and the effect the vaccine would have on it. Yes, so we've had a lot of people with stents vaccinated in Europe, England and America. None of them have blocked off. The stents have remained really good. There's no concern about blood clots with this vaccine, and the stents are looking good. And they've had like hundreds of thousands of people with stents being vaccinated now, so I do think we can feel confident. You know, the advantage of New Zealand not being the first country in the world to use this vaccine means that now there's so much experience out there about how it's gone that we can, you know, feel really good about it. We were not the first to use it, so that gives us a lot of confidence.
I think added to that is the fact that you can be very reassured that when you go for your vaccine, people will ask you questions about conditions that you might have, drugs that you might be on, And if there's any concerns whatsoever, then those will be taken into account. So this is safe for everybody to go along, and if there's any problems at all, then all the questions are very carefully worded and sorted out beforehand. So there's no reason to hold back, no matter what medical conditions you've got, no matter what drugs you're on.
This goes back to the same question we had before at how many in the room are vaccinated, because when the virus comes, it can find people who are unprotected. Now, obviously, we can't yet vaccinate all our children under 16, so all those children could spread the virus. A few vaccinated people can still spread the virus, not many, but a few. And anybody who's unvaccinated can spread the virus. So any community could carry 1 or 2 people who choose not to vaccinate. The rest of us will protect them. But if there's more and more people who choose not to be vaccinated, then the virus has got more ability to spread. So in New Zealand, we choose not to make it compulsory because we believe we can think it through as communities and decide for ourselves. Because I think every community can carry 1 or 2 people who really don't want the vaccine, because the rest of us will. But if there were lots of them, we'd be in trouble. Variants require the virus to hang around in a lot of group of people, and people will remember seeing those pictures, particularly from India, where you've got very big crowds of people together, and the more that the virus can spread in big crowds. So it's not just about an individual unvaccinated, it's a whole big group of unvaccinated people together that the virus can happily spread amongst them all. So that's what my point, you won't get a variant if you've only got 1 or 2 unvaccinated in your community, but if you've got very big numbers of unvaccinated, then the virus can get really happy and mix and mingle and shake hands with each other and mutate. So it's really a numbers game. Actually, that's a numbers game.
I just wanted to add to what Nikki said. It's a very good question. New Zealand's absolutely doing its part in limiting the emergence of new variants because we don't have transmission here. And unfortunately, the opposite is happening in the UK at the moment with an approach that we would not tolerate in New Zealand. We've got basically a population that's half vaccinated and they're allowing the virus to spread very widely. So they sometimes call it the let it rip approach, which we would really condemn in New Zealand, and we're not going to see any of that. But unfortunately, it means they're heading up to having 100,000 cases a day in that partially vaccinated population. There will be obviously deaths and other consequences, but one of the other problems, and why a whole lot of us scientists have spoken out against what they're doing, is that creates a perfect environment where variants of the virus that have the ability to partially escape the protection from the vaccine will be selected for. And that's how the virus keeps mutating and evolving before our eyes around the world. And that's why we have to do our utmost to get high vaccine coverage and to continue with our elimination strategy until we get to some point in the future where we might change direction. So all of us here are doing our bit for the world, in fact, by vaccinating ourselves.
So the question is, are there any medical problems that would be a problem with the vaccine at all? And the answer is actually no, because it's not a live vaccine. You can give it to anybody with any medical problem. Now, I said before about the very severe allergic reactions. If you've ever had a history of one of those really bad allergic reactions where you've needed an injection of adrenaline called anaphylaxis, you can still have the vaccine, but we watch people closely in case it comes again. So that's the only thing I'd highlight for everybody, is if you've ever had, it's not any old allergy, we're not worried about hives and itchies and runny noses, but if you've had the really bad one where you've needed adrenaline, then we watch people closely when we're vaccinating them in case it could happen again. They're the only caution. All medical problems, this vaccine's really good for, and it's really important for people with medical problems because they're at the most risk. Yeah. So the question is, can we sue the company, the government, if something happens to you? New Zealand has accident compensation, so ACC should be able to offer you all your lifelong riches if you have a reaction to the vaccine. Can I to say kia ora to that. I so agree with you. And people have said, well, how come, even prior to COVID, we didn't get that much attention to vaccines? That this is a resourcing issue, and we all need to be saying from government, we need more of this. Like Professor Tony said, we want to hear the community voices and people's, and we need more of this. So I tautoko you absolutely, and that I think we can all lobby the government to say, our communities need to be heard, they need their voices heard, they need the opportunity to talk to people. So I can only support what you're saying.
Yes, and I also agree, and also just want to offer my thanks to you as a strong Tokelauan community for organising tonight and inviting us to be a part of this evening, and also just to highlight as well and to share that there have been some other efforts in amongst some of our other Pacifica communities as well, but you were both correct in that we need more of this, and so again, please feel free to make suggestions and to invite us back or invite some others. We'd love to come back again, but I trust I speak on behalf of us all, and that we'd all be prepared to undertake more visits such as this and to connect with our communities. But just to highlight that there have been some other efforts, but that we just need more. So Marlon for what it is you've all done.
Yes, I really agree with those comments, and I know there's one remaining question on the list that we didn't get to, and I think it is an important one, and that's what will the future look like? And of course, none of us can predict this. I think anyone is brave to imagine what the world will look like in a year or 2 years' time with the pandemic. There's some indications, and I think there's a question, will we have a chance to get rid of the virus? There's degrees of getting rid of it. There's getting rid of it as a public health problem. And I think the best thing we can do is have high vaccine coverage. That really gives us huge protection. And hopefully there'll be such huge vaccine manufacturing capacity around the globe that we could look towards the entire world being vaccinated over the next couple of years, optimistically. And that will obviously largely, hopefully, get rid of this as a global public health problem. Getting rid of it entirely is another question. It may be impossible, we don't know yet. It might turn out the vaccines are so effective that we can have this elimination strategy move across the globe. Global eradication has only really happened with smallpox, very few. It's a very tough thing to achieve. So those questions are, I think, unanswerable at the moment. But certainly we can do our bit, and New Zealand really is doing its bit to contribute to the end of this as a global health problem. But it won't be for a while, and there will be huge impacts on all of us in terms of travel and so on. And I think also for Pacific Islands that have been so successful, like Tokelauan, at keeping the virus out, that will require an ongoing effort for the foreseeable future, but there will be an end point from that. I don't know if anyone wants to add.
You were talking about how good it was to have this conversation this evening, and it has been wonderful to kind of hear your questions. I just want to acknowledge your local health providers who are doing the mahi and the good work day in, day out, whether it's COVID, whether it's other vaccination programs, all the work that they do, that's also part of what has made this evening happen, and I think they deserve thanks.
Yes, well, I have a message, if that's okay, and that would be to say thank you to the people of Tokelauan for doing their part and for getting themselves vaccinated. I know that the vaccines have been made available, but still they've had to undertake their part as well to get the vaccine as well. So from me, it would be a thank you.
And from me, on behalf of the Immunisation Advisory Centre that's been working very closely with them, I can say from our staff who've worked with them really closely after the last few weeks that it was a huge pleasure to work with the Tokelauan community. They've found them warm and inviting and engaging, and they say that it was a fabulous way of running an immunisation program, and our team have had a lot of experience, and they have said that this is one of the best run they've ever seen. They're really proud of the Tokelauan community. Myself, I would say, don't forget your second dose. You've done a great job. Get the second dose in as well. Don't forget that Delta virus. That Delta variant, we want the second dose in, but I think you can feel really proud of what Tokelauan has been doing this week.
I would say congratulations to Tokelauan for being a global leader for the reasons that have just been expressed. So what has been achieved, the smoothness with which the vaccination campaign has been carried out, and the acceptance from the community is remarkable. So congratulations, and stay strong and do the same thing again.
Yes, I would add to that, and also I think we should think of the lessons that New Zealand and Tokelauan have from this experience of working together in a collaborative way, listening to scientists, and this gives us, I think, a huge agency and ability to tackle other shared health problems in the future. You know, climate change needs our collective effort. Inequalities, there's a long list, and I think Tokelauan has already shown its ability to come close to even eliminating tobacco use. So I think you can be absolutely a world leader and an example to countries across the globe in many areas. So all the best for the future.
Thank you. So the question is for those who still have doubts and fears. Firstly, it's okay and appropriate to have doubts and fears. One thing we haven't mentioned tonight is many of us are scared of having needles as well. And to be able to talk about it and acknowledge it and not hide the fact that we're actually pretty scared of having needles. Doubts are okay. Keep asking the questions. Professor Tony's already pointed out that you've got some fabulous local healthcare providers. So if you've got questions, find someone you feel you can trust to ask the question. And no question is ever dumb or stupid. We've all got these questions inside us. We've got lovely local healthcare services to ask. We're all aware that particularly on the internet there's a lot of really strange material. There's some people that are blowing their own bandwagons really loudly on the internet. So when you have a question and you're not sure, do ask some healthcare service provider that you feel confident in, that you feel like, and if they don't know the answer, then we can as healthcare providers go and ask each other, because we've got backup for ourselves as well. So when people ask me a question I don't know, I can go and ask another one. But we need to ask people who we feel that we can trust to give us honest and fair information. So that would be my support for everyone.
I would say that if that person comes to you and says, I'm fearful and I'm worried, you know you're not fearful and worried now. You can give them reassurance, support, just give them a little hug and say, it's going to be all right.